Imagine this: a city that shouldn't exist, built entirely on water. No solid ground, just wooden poles hammered into mud, holding up golden palaces. For 1,000 years, this impossible place controlled the world's wealth and made emperors bow. Then, almost overnight, it all crumbled. Tonight, I'm taking you into the story of Venice, the empire the world forgot. You know what's crazy? Venice shouldn't exist. Like, literally. There's no logical reason why anyone would build a city there. But here's the thing. Sometimes, desperation creates miracles. It's the 5th century. Rome is falling apart. Barbarian hordes are sweeping through Italy, burning everything in their path. People are running for their lives. And where do they go? Into a swamp. A lagoon filled with mosquitoes and mud. But you know what? The barbarians won't follow them there. Can't bring their horses through that mess. So these refugees start building. Not on land. There is no land. They drive wooden poles deep into the mud. Thousands of them. Oak and large. Driven down until they hit solid clay. Then they build platforms on top. Houses, churches, an entire city. It's insane when you think about it. Every building in Venice sits on a forest of wood buried underwater. The wood never rots because it's sealed away from oxygen. And somehow, it worked. These weren't warriors or kings, just regular people who refused to give up. They learned to live with the tides. They figured out how to fish, how to trade salt, how to navigate channels that would wreck anyone else's boat. They turned their biggest weakness into their greatest strength. The water that isolated them also protected them. And slowly, something magical happened. This little collection of muddy islands started to matter. The refugees became fishermen. The fishermen became traders. The traders became merchants. And the merchants became rich. Really rich. See, Venice sat right at the crossroads. To the north, you had Germanic kingdoms hungry for luxury goods. To the south and east, you had Byzantium and the Islamic world, overflowing with silk, spices, and gold. Venice was the middleman. And being the middleman in medieval trade, that's where the real money was. But here's what makes Venice different from every other city. They didn't just adapt to water, they mastered it. The sea wasn't their enemy, it was their highway, their fortress, their future. While other cities worried about armies marching through their gates, Venice had no gates, just water. Miles and miles of shallow lagoons that only Venetian pilots knew how to navigate. An enemy fleet trying to attack Venice? Good luck. You'd run aground before you got close. Okay, so here's where things get interesting. Most cities in medieval Europe were ruled by kings or warlords, right? Some duke or count who inherited power and did whatever he wanted. Not Venice. These guys looked at monarchy and said, nah, we're good. They created something called the Serenissima Repubblica, the Most Serene Republic. And listen, it was anything but serene behind the scenes, but that's what made it brilliant. They elected a leader called the Doge. Sounds fancy, right? Comes from the Latin word for leader. But here's the catch. The Doge couldn't do whatever he wanted. He was surrounded by councils, committees, checks and balances everywhere you looked. You couldn't become a dictator in Venice even if you tried. And believe me, some of them tried. The government had layers upon layers. The Great Council with hundreds of members, the Senate handling foreign policy, the Council of 10 dealing with security, and the Doge sitting at the top, looking important but constantly watched by everyone else. This was democracy before democracy was cool. Well, oligarchy technically. Only the wealthy merchant families got to vote. But still, compared to everywhere else in Europe, revolutionary. While France and England were dealing with mad kings and civil wars, Venice had a system that actually worked. And the best part? They were independent. See, technically, Venice was supposed to be part of the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople was the big boss, the heir to Rome. But the Venetians played it smart. They paid lip service, nodded politely, sent some gifts now and then. Meanwhile, they were doing their own thing, building their own navy, making their own trade deals, electing their own leaders. By the time Byzantium realized Venice had slipped the leash, it was too late. The Venetians were too rich, too powerful, too useful to punish. Constantinople needed Venice more than Venice needed Constantinople. And that power dynamic? That's what let Venice grow. The genius of Venetian government was that nobody could get too powerful. If you were a merchant family trying to dominate politics, other families would band together to stop you. If a doge got too ambitious, the council would shut him down. It was messy, sure, lots of backstabbing, lots of political intrigue, but it kept the city stable for centuries, while kingdoms around them rose and fell in bloody succession. And here's something wild. They had term limits. Sort of. The Doge served for life, but his power was so limited that it didn't really matter. Meanwhile, the real power rotated through different families and different councils. No one person could control everything. It wasn't perfect, but man, it worked. For a very, very long time. Let me tell you about the Arsenale. This place was basically the Google headquarters of the medieval world. A massive shipyard, the largest industrial complex in Europe, where Venice built its navy. And when I say massive, I mean they could build a fully functional warship in a single day. 1 day. That's assembly line production. 500 years before Henry Ford figured it out. They had it down to a science. Standardized parts, specialized workers, division of labor that would make an economist weep with joy. Each team focused on one task: hulls, masts, sails, weapons. A ship would float down a canal through the Arsenale, and at each station, workers would add the next piece. By the time it reached the end, boom, ready for war, ready to sail, ready to dominate. The Venetian galley was their masterpiece. Long, sleek ships powered by oars and sails, fast enough to chase down pirates, strong enough to ram enemy vessels, maneuverable enough to fight in shallow coastal waters, and versatile. You could load them with cargo one day, cannons the next. These weren't just boats. They were the F-16s of their era. But here's what nobody talks about: the knowledge. Venice guarded their shipbuilding secrets like nuclear codes. If you were a master shipbuilder in the Arsenale, you couldn't just leave and work somewhere else. They'd hunt you down, seriously, because those secrets were national security. The design of the hulls, the way they waterproofed them, the techniques for making them fast and strong, that knowledge was power. Lose control of shipbuilding, lose control of the Mediterranean. And it wasn't just military ships. Venice had cargo vessels, fishing boats, passenger ferries, a whole fleet for every purpose. They had specialized ships for hauling grain from Egypt, others for transporting wine from Greece, others for carrying pilgrims to the Holy Land. While other nations were figuring out how to build one decent ship, Venice had an entire maritime ecosystem humming along like clockwork. The Arsenale employed thousands of workers. It was like a city within a city. And these weren't just laborers. They were skilled craftsmen, engineers before engineering was a word. They experimented, innovated, improved. Every generation of Venetian ships was better than the last. The sea was their kingdom, and they made sure everyone knew it. Venetian ships patrolled trade routes, escorted merchant convoys, hunted pirates, blockaded enemy ports. If you wanted to do business in the Mediterranean, you had to deal with Venice. There was no way around them. Literally. They controlled the Adriatic completely. The Eastern Mediterranean, Venice had bases everywhere. Islands, coastal cities, trading posts. Now here's where Venice shows you how to turn religion into profit. The Crusades start in 1095. Pope Urban II is calling for warriors to go liberate Jerusalem from Muslim control. It's all very holy and spiritual. Except for Venice. For Venice, it's a business opportunity. Think about it. You've got thousands of European knights who need to get to the Holy Land. They need ships. They need supplies. They need transportation. And who controls the ships? Venice. So the Venetians become the logistics company for the Crusades. They charge premium prices, of course. This is war, after all. Supply and demand. But Venice doesn't just transport crusaders. Oh no. They negotiate. They make deals. Sure, we'll take you to Jerusalem. But first, could you help us conquer this city that's been competing with our trade? It's on the way. Sort of. The Crusaders need the ships, so they agree. Venice expands its territory using holy warriors. Genius. And then comes 1204, the Fourth Crusade. This is where Venice goes from powerful to unstoppable. The Crusaders owe Venice a massive debt. Can't pay? No problem. Venice has an idea. See that city over there? Constantinople. The richest city in the world. Christian, sure, but they're Orthodox, not Catholic, so technically, and besides, they owe us money too. The Doge at the time is this old man, Enrico Dandolo. He's probably in his 90s and blind, but his mind? Sharp as a blade. He convinces the Crusaders to attack Constantinople instead of going to Jerusalem. This is supposed to be a holy war, remember? But Dandolo doesn't care. He wants revenge against Byzantium, wants to break their power, wants Venice to take their place. So they attack. Constantinople falls. And the sack of Constantinople is one of the most brutal events in medieval history. 3 days of looting, burning, killing. Priceless treasures destroyed. Libraries burned. Churches ransacked. And Venice? Venice takes its share. The famous bronze horses of St. Mark's? Stolen from Constantinople. Golden relics, silk, jewels, ancient manuscripts. It all flows back to Venice. But more importantly, Venice takes territory. Islands, ports, trading posts all over the Eastern Mediterranean. The Byzantine Empire never recovers, and Venice becomes the supreme naval power. They don't just control trade anymore. They control the routes, the ports, the entire system. This is Venice at its most ruthless. They used religion as a cover for empire building. They turned a spiritual crusade into a corporate takeover. And it worked. For the next 200 years, Venice is untouchable. Let me explain how spices made Venice the richest city on earth. Today, you can buy black pepper at any grocery store for a few dollars. In medieval Europe, pepper was worth more than gold by weight. Literally. People paid in peppercorns. It was currency. Why? Because spices came from far away. India, Indonesia, Ceylon, places that Europeans couldn't reach directly. And spices weren't just for flavor. They preserved meat. They masked the taste of food going bad. They were used in medicine. In a world without refrigeration, spices were essential. Here's how the trade worked. Spices grown in Asia would travel by caravan to the Middle East. Arab and Indian merchants controlled that route. Then the spices would arrive in ports like Alexandria or Beirut. And who controlled trade with those ports? Venice. The spices would be loaded onto Venetian ships, sailed across the Mediterranean, and sold in Europe at massive markups. Venice didn't produce anything. They were the middlemen. But being the middlemen in the spice trade, that's where the money was. They'd buy spices in the east, transport them west, and sell them for 10, 20, sometimes 30 times what they paid. The profit margins were insane. And Venice made sure nobody could compete. They had treaties with the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt, with various Byzantine successor states, with everyone who mattered. They had the ships, the sailors who knew the routes, the connections, the capital to buy in bulk. If another Italian city tried to break into the spice trade, Venice would undercut them, blockade them, or just buy them out. The wealth flowing into Venice was staggering. Merchant families became richer than kings. The Venetian ducat, their gold coin, became the dollar of the medieval world. It was accepted everywhere, trusted everywhere, because everyone knew it contained real gold. You could use a Venetian ducat in London, in Constantinople, in Damascus. It was the reserve currency. This wealth transformed the city. They built palaces along the Grand Canal, each one trying to outdo the others. They commissioned art, sponsored artists, collected libraries. Venice became not just rich, but cultured, sophisticated, a magnet for talent from all over Europe and beyond. But here's the thing about monopolies. They make you lazy. Venice got comfortable. They thought they'd always control the spice trade. They thought no one could challenge them. They were making so much money that they didn't innovate, didn't explore, didn't think about what would happen if someone found another route to Asia. That complacency? That's going to cost them everything. But we're not there yet. So, Venice is rolling in money. What do you do when you're that rich? You show off. And Venice showed off big time. They built St. Mark's Basilica, this incredible cathedral covered in gold mosaics. I mean, covered. Every surface gleaming. They topped it with those bronze horses stolen from Constantinople. The whole thing was a statement. We're not just rich. We're glorious. We're chosen by God. Look at us. The Doge's Palace next door? Same deal. Gothic architecture meets Byzantine opulence. Marble columns, painted ceilings, rooms filled with art. This wasn't just a government building. It was a museum, a statement of power. Foreign ambassadors would walk through those halls and understand immediately. You don't mess with Venice. But it wasn't just buildings. Venice became a cultural hub. Artists flocked there because that's where the money was. The wealthy merchant families were competing to sponsor the best painters, the best architects, the best musicians. If you were a talented artist in 15th century Italy, you went to Venice. And books. Venice became the printing capital of Europe. When Gutenberg invented the printing press, Venice immediately saw the potential. By 1500, Venice had more printing presses than any other city. They were publishing books in Latin, Italian, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, anything that would sell. Classical texts, religious works, scientific treatises, poetry. Venice became the center of learning. The city attracted intellectuals, philosophers, scientists. The University of Padua, under Venetian control, became one of the great universities of Europe. Galileo taught there. The freedom Venice offered, well, relative freedom, made it a place where ideas could flourish. As long as you didn't directly challenge the government, you could say and write pretty much anything. Venice also threw the best parties. The carnival became legendary. For weeks, every year, everyone would wear masks, social hierarchy would flip upside down, and the city would become one giant festival. The masks weren't just fun. They served a purpose. In a city built on secrets and intrigue, sometimes you needed to hide who you were. Carnival made that acceptable, even celebrated. The wealthy Venetians lived incredibly well. Silk clothes from the East, spices in their food, glass from Murano, the finest in the world, parties with entertainment from across Europe. They had everything luxury could buy. But they also had culture, education, sophistication. Venice wasn't just about money, it was about style. While Venice is living its best life, a new power is rising in the East, the Ottoman Turks. And they're not playing around. The Ottomans take Constantinople in 1453, finally ending what was left of the Byzantine Empire. This is a massive shift. For 1,000 years, Constantinople was the great Christian city of the East. Now it's Ottoman, Muslim, and renamed Istanbul. And the Ottomans? They have ambitions. Big ones. For Venice, this is complicated. On one hand, the Ottomans are Muslim, and there's supposed to be this whole Christian versus Muslim thing happening. On the other hand, business is business. Venice has been trading with Muslims for centuries. Religion never got in the way of profit before. So Venice tries to play it smart. They negotiate. They send ambassadors. They make treaties. Sometimes they even ally with the Ottomans against other Christian powers. Venice doesn't care about religious wars. They care about keeping the trade routes open. But the Ottomans want control of the Mediterranean too. They're building a massive navy. They're taking islands that Venice used to control, Cyprus, Crete, the Greek islands. One by one, they're falling to Ottoman forces. And Venice can't stop it. They fight wars, win some battles, lose others. But the trend is clear. Ottoman power is growing. Venetian power is being squeezed. The worst part? Venice is caught between two worlds. In Europe, people think Venice is too friendly with the Turks, too willing to make deals with Muslims. But the Ottomans don't fully trust Venice either. They know Venice will always put profit first. So Venice ends up isolated. Not quite European, not quite Eastern. Just alone. There are brutal wars. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571 is this massive naval battle where a Christian coalition, including Venice, defeats the Ottoman fleet. It's celebrated as this great victory. And it was impressive. Thousands of ships, tens of thousands of soldiers and sailors fighting in the Mediterranean. But you know what? It didn't change anything. The Ottomans rebuilt their fleet within a year. The war continued. Venice is bleeding money on these wars. Their treasury is being drained. They're losing territory. And they're starting to realize something scary. They might not be the dominant power anymore. The Mediterranean isn't their sea alone. They're sharing it now. And sharing means losing. Let's talk about the dark side of Venice. The spy network, the secret police, the paranoia that kept the Republic running. Venice had this thing called the Council of Ten. Officially, they dealt with security matters. Unofficially, they were the CIA, FBI, and KGB rolled into one. They had spies everywhere. In the government, in the churches, in the merchant houses. Nowhere was safe. You could be sitting in a cafe talking about politics, and someone at the next table might be reporting your conversation. The Council of Ten had basically unlimited power when it came to threats against the state. They could arrest people in secret, hold trials in secret, execute people in secret. There were these slots in walls around the city called bocche di leone, lions' mouths. You could drop anonymous accusations into them. Someone would investigate. If they found evidence, you'd disappear in the middle of the night. Did this lead to abuse? Absolutely. Personal grudges got turned into state security matters. Business rivals would accuse each other of treason. But from the government's perspective, it worked. Venice went centuries without a successful coup or revolution. The system was brutal, but it was stable. And then there was the diplomacy. Venetian ambassadors were famous for being the best-informed people in Europe. Why? Because they were all spies. They'd go to foreign courts, attend parties, listen to gossip, and send detailed reports back to Venice. Everything. What the king ate for breakfast, who was sleeping with whom, what the military capabilities were. Everything. Venice knew everyone's secrets. And they used that knowledge ruthlessly in negotiations. You're trying to make a deal with Venice? They already know your financial situation, your military weaknesses, your political pressures. They had every advantage. The culture of secrecy went deep. Important meetings happened behind closed doors. Decisions were made by secret ballot. Even the Doge didn't always know what the Council of Ten was up to. The whole system ran on information control. But there was a downside to all this paranoia. It created an atmosphere of distrust. People were afraid to speak freely, afraid to innovate, afraid to challenge the status quo. Because challenging anything could be seen as disloyalty, and disloyalty could get you killed. The mask culture in Venice wasn't just about carnival. Masks let you hide your identity, conduct business without being recognized, have conversations without being reported. In a surveillance state, anonymity becomes precious. So Venetians embraced it, turned it into an art form. This is the Venice that tourists don't see. Behind the beautiful facades, behind the golden mosaics, there was this machine of control. It kept the Republic running for centuries, but it also made Venice rigid, resistant to change. And that rigidity? That's going to be a problem. Let's talk about peak Venice, the moment when they had it all. By the early 1500s, Venice controls an empire. Not a land empire like Rome, or a colonial empire like Spain will build. A maritime empire. A string of islands, ports, and coastal cities all around the Mediterranean and into the Black Sea. Crete, Cyprus, the Dalmatian coast, parts of Greece. Everywhere that matters for trade, Venice has a foothold. They have colonies, not in the modern sense, but trading posts defended by Venetian fortresses. Each one sends wealth back to the mother city. Gold, silver, grain, wine, silk, spices. Everything flows through Venice, and Venice takes a cut of everything. The city itself is unrecognizable from those muddy islands where refugees hid from barbarians. Now it's a metropolis. 100,000 people, maybe more. That's huge for medieval Europe. And these aren't peasants. Venice has a massive middle class. Merchants, craftsmen, sailors, traders. People making good money, living well. The wealth inequality is still insane, don't get me wrong. The top merchant families are richer than most kings. They have palaces that would make monarchs jealous. But even ordinary Venetians are better off than ordinary people in most of Europe. There's work, there's food, there's opportunity. Venice is cosmopolitan in a way that most European cities aren't. You've got Italians, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Arabs, all living and working together. Different religions, different languages, different cultures. As long as you pay your taxes and follow the laws, Venice doesn't care where you're from. This is centuries before the idea of tolerance becomes mainstream. Venice is doing it because it's practical. You can't run a global trading empire if you're only willing to work with people exactly like you. The military is strong. The navy is unmatched. The arsenale can produce ships faster than anyone can sink them. Venice can project power anywhere in the Mediterranean. If a pirate base needs to be destroyed, Venice destroys it. If a rival city needs to be blockaded, Venice blockades it. They have the ships, the sailors, the money, and the will. But here's the thing about being at the top. You can only go down. And Venice is about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. Because while they're busy managing their Mediterranean empire, the world is changing. And Venice isn't paying attention. Ships arrive in Venice from the east. They're carrying something besides cargo. They're carrying plague. The Black Death hits Venice like a hammer. This isn't just bad luck. Venice is uniquely vulnerable. They're a port city. Ships come from everywhere, carrying rats, carrying fleas, carrying death. And the city is crowded. People living close together, narrow streets, limited sanitation. Perfect conditions for disease to spread. Within months, thousands are dying. Then tens of thousands. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. The economy collapses. Who wants to trade when everyone's dying? Ships sit empty in the harbor. Shops close. Entire neighborhoods are abandoned. Venice loses a third of its population, maybe more. The exact numbers are lost to history, but it's catastrophic. Whole families wiped out, businesses with no one left to run them, ships with no sailors to crew them. The city is hemorrhaging people and wealth. But here's where Venice shows its genius. They innovate. They realize that ships are bringing the disease, so they create quarantine. If a ship arrives from an infected area, it has to anchor offshore for 40 days. 40 giorni in Italian, which is where the word quarantine comes from. 40 days. If nobody shows symptoms after 40 days, then they can enter the port. Does it work perfectly? No. The plague keeps coming back in waves over the next few centuries. But it works well enough. Venice survives. A lot of cities don't. The plague changes Venice in other ways too. With so many dead, there's a labor shortage. Wages go up. Workers have more power. The rigid social hierarchy loosens a bit. Some families lose their wealth, others rise up. It's chaos, but it's also opportunity. And Venice isn't the only city dealing with this. The entire Mediterranean world is devastated. Everywhere Venice trades, people are dying. But Venice recovers faster than most. Their government holds together. Their economy, though damaged, survives. And when the plague finally starts to fade, Venice is still there. Weaker, sure, but still dominant. The plague becomes a recurring nightmare. Every few decades, another outbreak. Venice builds plague hospitals on isolated islands. They develop protocols, procedures. They become experts at managing epidemic disease in a way that most cities never do. But each outbreak takes a toll. Each time Venice loses people, loses money, loses time. And while they're dealing with disease, their competitors are catching up. A Portuguese explorer named Bartolomeu Diaz rounds the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. Venice barely notices. They should have, because 10 years later, Vasco da Gama completes the voyage. He sails from Portugal around Africa to India and back. And everything changes. See, for centuries, if you wanted spices from Asia, you had to go through the Middle East. And if you wanted to trade with the Middle East, you had to go through Venice. That's where Venice's power came from. They controlled the bottleneck. But now, Portuguese ships can sail directly to India, load up on spices, sail back to Europe. No middlemen, no Venetian merchants taking their cut, no inflated prices. The spices are cheaper, the profits are higher, and Venice is cut out completely. At first, Venice doesn't take it seriously. They think it's a fluke. The Portuguese route is longer, more dangerous. It requires sailing around the entire continent of Africa. Ships will sink, crews will die. It's not sustainable, right? Wrong. The Portuguese make it work. Then the Spanish get in on it. Then the Dutch. Then the English. Suddenly, all these Atlantic powers are sailing directly to Asia and bringing back shiploads of wealth. The center of trade shifts. It's not the Mediterranean anymore. It's the Atlantic. And Venice? Venice is stuck in the Mediterranean. The economic impact is devastating. Venetian merchants who made fortunes in the spice trade watch their profits evaporate. The price of spices in Europe plummets because there's so much competition. Venice tries to compete, but they can't. They don't have access to the Atlantic. They don't have colonies in the New World. They don't have the Atlantic trade routes. This is an existential crisis. Venice's entire economy was built on being the bridge between East and West. Now that bridge is irrelevant. It's like if someone invented teleportation tomorrow. The airline industry would collapse overnight. That's what's happening to Venice. They try to adapt. They invest in manufacturing. Venetian glass from Murano becomes famous. They produce silk. They produce weapons. They produce luxury goods. But manufacturing doesn't produce the insane profits that the spice trade did. It's not enough to maintain their empire. The other problem is political. All these Atlantic powers, Portugal, Spain, England, France, the Netherlands, they're becoming nation-states. Centralized governments with professional armies and navies. They have populations in the millions. They have resources from entire continents. Venice is just one city with some colonies. They can't compete with that scale. Venice still matters, but they're not dominant anymore. They're not dictating terms. They're negotiating from weakness. And for a city that spent centuries as the powerhouse of Mediterranean trade, that's a bitter pill to swallow. The world moved on, and Venice couldn't move with it. If losing the spice monopoly wasn't bad enough, Venice now faces enemies everywhere. Because when you've been the dominant power for centuries, everyone wants a piece of you when you start to weaken. The League of Cambrai forms. Who's in it? France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Pope. Basically, all the major European powers band together with one goal: destroy Venice. They claim Venice has gotten too powerful, too arrogant, too rich. Really, they just want to divide up Venetian territory. Venice is suddenly fighting on all fronts. French armies invade from the west. Imperial forces attack from the north. The Pope excommunicates the entire city. Every Venetian is cut off from the church. For a Christian society, that's supposed to be devastating. But Venice just shrugs. They've always put the Republic above religion anyway. The wars drag on for years. Venice loses territory, regains some, loses more. It's exhausting. It's expensive. The treasury is being drained by military expenses. They have to borrow money, raise taxes, melt down church treasures to mint coins. Everything is being poured into the war effort. Meanwhile, the Ottomans are still pushing from the east. They take Cyprus in 1570 after a brutal siege. The Venetian defenders fight to the last man, but it doesn't matter. Ottoman forces are overwhelming. Cyprus is gone. And Cyprus was crucial. It was Venice's last major base in the eastern Mediterranean. Venice keeps fighting. They win the Battle of Lepanto, this massive naval victory in 1571. It's celebrated across Christian Europe as this great triumph. Finally, the Ottomans are stopped. Except they're not. The Ottomans rebuild their fleet. The war continues. And in the end, Venice loses more than they gain. The problem is resources. Venice is rich, but these nation-states are richer. They have bigger populations to draw soldiers from. They have more land to tax. Venice is stretched thin, fighting too many enemies with too few resources. And the quality of Venice's military is declining. They used to have the best navy in the world, but now they're hiring mercenaries to crew their ships. The pride, the skill, the dedication. It's fading. This isn't the navy that dominated the Mediterranean for centuries. This is a shadow of that force. By the early 1600s, Venice has fought itself to exhaustion. They've survived, which is something, but survival isn't dominance. They control less territory than before. Their trade is disrupted. Their treasury is empty. They're still independent, still wealthy by most standards, but the empire is crumbling. Here's where Venice does something unexpected. If you can't be powerful, be entertaining. By the 1600s, Venice realizes they can't compete militarily or economically with the big European powers, so they pivot. They turn the city into Europe's playground, the party capital, the place where wealthy Europeans come to experience pleasure, art, and freedom they can't find at home. The carnival grows bigger, wilder, more famous. It's not just a festival anymore. It's months-long celebration. Gambling houses open up everywhere. The government licenses them, taxes them, gets a cut of the profits. Venice becomes famous for casinos. If you want to gamble, Venice is where you go. Theatre flourishes. Opera houses open. Composers write specifically for Venetian audiences. Vivaldi is Venetian. The Four Seasons, all those famous compositions. The arts are booming because Venice is catering to tourists. Wealthy nobles from across Europe visit Venice to see opera, commission portraits, buy art. This is cultural tourism before anyone called it that. Venice leans into its exoticism. The masks, the mystery, the canals, the beautiful crumbling buildings. It's all marketed. Venice creates an image of itself as this magical, decadent, slightly dangerous place. And people eat it up. Courtesans become famous, not just prostitutes. Educated, cultured women who entertain wealthy men, discuss philosophy and art, host salons. Some of them become celebrities. Foreign visitors write about their experiences with Venetian courtesans. It's scandalous. It's fascinating. It's exactly the reputation Venice is cultivating. The churches fill with art, commissioned by wealthy families trying to secure their place in heaven. Venice becomes this incredible open-air museum. Every building has a story. Every church has masterpieces. Painters like Titian, Tintoretto, Veronese are creating works that will hang in museums centuries later. But here's the sad reality. Venice is living off its past glory. They're not building an empire anymore. They're not conquering new markets. They're entertaining tourists. It's a living, sure. Tourism brings in money. But it's not the massive wealth of the spice trade. It's not the power of controlling Mediterranean commerce. The merchant class is fading. Their sons become patrons of the arts instead of traders. Why risk your life sailing to dangerous ports when you can live comfortably in Venice, enjoying art and music? The ambition that built Venice is dying, and the government becomes conservative, resistant to change. They want to preserve what they have left. New ideas are viewed with suspicion. Innovation slows. Venice becomes a museum of itself, beautiful but stagnant. The parties continue. The tourists keep coming. Venice is still famous, still admired, but it's not feared anymore. It's not respected as a power. It's a curiosity, a living relic, and everyone knows it. Let's talk about how an economy dies slowly, because that's what's happening to Venice in the 1600s and 1700s. The manufacturing industries that Venice relied on after losing the spice trade, they're struggling. Venetian glass from Murano is still famous, but now there's competition from Bohemia, from England. Other places have learned the techniques, often by bribing Venetian glassmakers to move and teach their secrets. The textile industry, silk weaving, weapons manufacturing, all facing competition. And Venice can't compete on price. Labor in Venice is expensive. Raw materials have to be imported. Their products are high quality, sure, but they're also expensive. And the market is shifting toward cheaper goods produced at scale. Venice also missed the boat on colonialism, literally. While Spain, Portugal, England, France, and the Netherlands are carving up the Americas, Africa, and Asia, Venice has nothing. They don't have colonies bringing back silver from South America. They don't have plantations producing sugar and tobacco. They don't have trading posts in India and Indonesia. Part of this is geographical. Venice doesn't have direct access to the Atlantic, but part of it is also mental. Venice is Mediterranean-focused. They're stuck in the old world, the old way of doing things. They don't see the future happening in the oceans they don't sail. The banking sector, which used to be strong, is also struggling. Venice invented many modern banking practices, but now Amsterdam and London are becoming the financial centers. They have better connections to the global economy. Money flows there, not to Venice. The Venetian government is also financially strained. Centuries of warfare have left them with massive debts. They're paying interest on loans taken generations ago. Public finances are a mess. They try raising taxes, but there's only so much you can squeeze out of a declining economy. Here's a telling detail. Wealthy Venetian families start buying land on the mainland. They build villas in the countryside. Why? Because land is a safer investment than trade. When your merchant class is buying farms instead of ships, you know something fundamental has shifted. The population is declining too. Plague still hits periodically, but also people are leaving. Young people with ambition go to the mainland cities, to Rome, to the emerging commercial centers elsewhere in Europe. Venice is becoming a place for old money, old families, old ways. And the government is paralyzed by conservative politics. Any reform is blocked by factions worried it will threaten their privileges. They can't modernize their navy because ship captains resist changes. They can't reform taxes because wealthy families resist paying more. Everyone is protecting their slice of a shrinking pie. By the 1700s, Venice is basically irrelevant on the European stage. They still exist, they're still independent, but nobody takes them seriously anymore. Their foreign policy is pure survival. They don't take sides in European conflicts. They stay neutral in every war, even when neutrality means being walked over. They can't afford to fight. They don't have the military power. So they just try to keep their heads down and hope everyone leaves them alone. The Navy that once controlled the Mediterranean is a joke. They have old ships that haven't been updated in decades. The sailors are poorly trained. The Arsenale still exists, but it's running at a fraction of its former capacity. They might build 1 or 2 ships a year when they used to build hundreds. When pirates operate in the Adriatic, Venice can barely stop them. Pirates! In waters Venice used to control absolutely. It's humiliating. Merchant ships refuse to sail under the Venetian flag because it doesn't offer protection anymore. Diplomatically, Venice is ignored. Major European treaties get negotiated without consulting them. Their ambassadors still go to foreign courts, but they're not listened to the way they used to be. They're a curiosity, representatives of a once great power that everyone remembers, but nobody fears. The territories Venice still controls are restless. Why should they be ruled by Venice when Venice can't protect them anymore? Some territories start making their own deals with other powers. The empire is dissolving not through conquest, but through irrelevance. And the government is completely dysfunctional. The Great Council has become this bloated institution where nothing gets done. Factions block each other. Every decision requires endless debate and compromise. They can't act quickly or decisively because the system that once made Venice stable now makes it paralyzed. The cultural scene is still vibrant, which is something. Venice is still producing great art, great music. Casanova is Venetian. His memoirs will make Venice famous for romance and adventure. But that's about sex and parties, not power and influence. It's not serious. The population keeps declining. The economy keeps shrinking. The government keeps borrowing money it can't repay. Everyone can see the trajectory. Venice is dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, inevitably. Like watching a sunset. Beautiful, but temporary. And then comes 1797, the year everything ends. Napoleon Bonaparte marches into Italy with a French army. He's young, ambitious, brilliant, and ruthless, and Venice is in his way. The Venetian government panics. They try diplomacy. They send ambassadors to negotiate with Napoleon, offering money, offering neutrality, offering anything to avoid conflict. But Napoleon doesn't care about Venice's offers. He sees a weak, outdated republic clinging to past glory, and he needs territory to trade in his negotiations with Austria. Venice tries to stay neutral in the war between France and Austria. They don't take sides, they don't interfere, they just want to be left alone. But Napoleon doesn't respect neutrality. He accuses Venice of supporting Austria, of harboring Austrian troops, of breaking their neutrality. The accusations are mostly false, but it doesn't matter. Napoleon issues an ultimatum: submit to French control or be destroyed. The Venetian government is split. Some want to fight. They still have some ships, some fortifications. Maybe they can hold out. But most realize it's hopeless. France has a modern army. Venice has militias and hired mercenaries. It would be a massacre. In May 1797, the Great Council meets for the last time. They vote to dissolve the Republic. 1,100 years of independence ended by a vote. The last Doge, Ludovico Manin, removes his ceremonial cap and hands it to his servant, saying, "Take it. I won't be needing this anymore." It's one of the saddest moments in European history. Not dramatic, not heroic, just quiet surrender. A republic that had survived for 11 centuries, choosing to end itself rather than fight a losing battle. French troops march into Venice unopposed, and then the looting begins. Napoleon's soldiers systematically strip the city of its treasures: paintings, sculptures, ancient manuscripts, gold and silver from churches. Everything valuable is packed up and shipped to France. The bronze horses of St. Mark's, taken to Paris. It's the sack of Constantinople all over again, except this time, Venice is the victim. Napoleon doesn't even keep Venice. Within months, he trades it to Austria as part of a treaty. Venice isn't a prize, it's a bargaining chip. Austria gets Venice, Napoleon gets other territories he wants more. Venice, this city that once dictated terms to emperors, is now just a piece on a diplomatic chessboard. The Austrians aren't cruel, but they're not kind either. Venice becomes just another city in the Austrian Empire. The government is dismantled. The Doge's palace becomes administrative offices. The great council hall is empty. The Venetian nobility lose their privileges. Some adapt, some flee, some just fade into irrelevance. The people of Venice are shocked, grief-stricken, but they're also exhausted. They've watched their city decline for centuries. Maybe, some think, being part of a larger empire will bring stability. Maybe it's not so bad. But deep down, everyone knows. Venice, as an independent power, is dead. It will never come back. For the next 70 years, Venice is passed around like unwanted furniture. Austria controls it. Then briefly it goes back to France under Napoleon. Then Austria again after Napoleon falls. Being Austrian isn't terrible. The Austrians invest in infrastructure. They build railways connecting Venice to the mainland. They modernize the port. They bring in their bureaucracy, their laws, their systems. It's efficient but soulless. Venice loses its identity as a unique republic and becomes just another provincial city. The people of Venice hate it, though. They remember independence, remember pride. Being ruled by foreigners, even relatively benign ones, is humiliating. There are small rebellions, protests, occasional riots. In 1848, there's a brief revolution. Venice declares independence again, forms a republic, tries to recreate the past glory. It lasts 1 year before Austrian forces crush it. What's interesting is that even under foreign rule, Venice remains culturally important. Artists, writers, musicians still come here. Lord Byron visits, writes poetry about Venice. John Ruskin writes about Venetian architecture, helps spark interest in preserving the city's buildings. Venice becomes a symbol of romantic decay, beautiful ruins of past greatness. The tourism industry grows. Wealthy Europeans do the grand tour, and Venice is a mandatory stop. They come to see the canals, the palaces, the art. They stay in hotels, eat in restaurants, buy souvenirs. Venice transitions from a trading empire to a tourist destination. It's not glorious, but it's economically necessary. The population continues to decline, though. By the mid-1800s, Venice has maybe 120,000 people, down from its peak. Many buildings are abandoned, falling apart. There's no money to maintain them. The canals fill with garbage. The city that once gleamed with gold and marble is dirty, crumbling, poor. In 1866, Venice finally becomes part of Italy. The new unified Italian state takes control. For Venice, it's bittersweet. They're Italian, sure, but they're not independent. They're not special. They're just another city in a nation that's frankly more interested in Rome and Milan. Being Italian doesn't restore Venice's glory. If anything, it highlights how far they've fallen. Rome is the capital. Milan is the economic center. Venice is the tourist attraction, the beautiful museum city that reminds Italians of past greatness, but has no real power or influence. The identity crisis is real. What does it mean to be Venetian when Venice isn't Venice anymore? The old families cling to their heritage, their traditions, but young people leave for opportunities elsewhere. The dialects start to fade. The unique Venetian culture gets absorbed into broader Italian culture. 20th century Venice faces a new existential threat: tourism. Sounds weird, right? But hear me out. Tourism becomes Venice's main industry. Millions of people visit every year. They come to see the famous sights: St. Mark's Square, the Doge's Palace, the Bridge of Sighs, the Grand Canal. They take gondola rides, eat pasta, buy glass figurines. They spend money, which the city desperately needs. But there's a cost. Venice becomes a theme park version of itself. Restaurants cater to tourists, not locals. Shops sell cheap souvenirs instead of goods people actually need. The city center empties of actual residents and fills with hotels and Airbnbs. The population crashes. In the 1950s, the historic center had about 175,000 residents. Today, around 50,000 and dropping. Young people can't afford to live there. Housing prices are insane because investors buy properties to rent to tourists. Jobs are all tourism-related, low-paying and seasonal. If you want a real career, you move to the mainland. Venice risks becoming a city without citizens. Just tourists visiting empty buildings maintained by service workers who commute in. It's weird and sad. Venice survived wars, plagues, foreign occupation. But can it survive its own fame? Then there's the physical threat. Venice is sinking. Well, technically sea levels are rising, but the effect is the same. The city floods regularly now. Acqua alta, high water, used to be rare. Now it happens dozens of times per year. St. Mark's Square underwater, streets turned into canals. It's picturesque for tourists, but disastrous for residents. Climate change makes it worse. Storms are stronger, sea levels are higher. The lagoon ecosystem is changing. Scientists predict that without intervention, Venice could be uninhabitable within a century. This city that survived 1,000 years of human threats might be destroyed by nature. The Italian government launches MOSE, a massive engineering project. Movable barriers that can be raised to block high tides. It's expensive, controversial, plagued by corruption and delays. But when it works, it works. The barriers go up, the water stays out. Venice is saved. For now. But here's the deeper question. What is Venice trying to be saved for? If it's just a museum city, an open-air Disneyland for tourists, is that worth saving? Or should Venice try to be a real, living city again? Can it be both? There are no easy answers. Some people argue for limiting tourism, making it harder for non-residents to buy property, investing in industries beyond tourism. Others say tourism is all Venice has. Embrace it, manage it, profit from it. What's clear is that Venice in the 21st century faces challenges its founders never imagined. Not invading armies or economic competitors, but its own success as a tourist destination, and the environmental changes threatening to literally sink the city into the sea. Let's talk about what threatens Venice today, because it's not just water. Cruise ships. These massive vessels, floating cities themselves, sail right past Venice. They're huge, bigger than any building in Venice. They create waves that erode the foundations of buildings. Their pollution damages the fragile ecosystem of the lagoon. And they bring thousands of tourists who flood the city for a few hours, overwhelm everything, then leave without spending much money locally. Venetians hate them. They protest, they campaign, they demand bans. The Italian government goes back and forth. Ban them, allow them, reroute them. It's complicated because cruise ships bring tourists, and tourism is the economy. But they're also destroying the city. It's a perfect example of Venice's modern dilemma. Then there's infrastructure. The buildings are centuries old. The foundations are ancient wood driven into mud. Modern engineering can help, but every repair is complicated and expensive. You can't just fix a building in Venice like you would anywhere else. You need specialists, traditional techniques, materials that might not exist anymore. The city is also dealing with mass tourism in the age of Instagram. Everyone wants the perfect photo of Venice. They go to the same spots, at the same times, following the same routes. This creates bottlenecks. St. Mark's Square so crowded you can barely move. The Rialto Bridge packed with people. Meanwhile, entire neighborhoods are empty because they're not photogenic enough. Venice has tried various solutions. They've implemented day tripper taxes. You want to visit for just a few hours? Pay a fee. It's controversial, but it's an attempt to manage the crowds and fund preservation. They've created alternate routes, promoted lesser-known areas, tried to spread tourism around the city. Some neighborhoods are fighting back. Locals open shops selling actual goods, not just souvenirs. They organize community events that celebrate Venetian culture, not tourist expectations. There's a movement to preserve Venice as a real city, not just a stage set. The younger generation is interesting. Some are leaving, sure, but others are staying, trying to save their city. They're using social media to show the real Venice, not the tourist version. They're documenting the problems, the floods, the empty schools, the closed businesses. They're making noise. And people are listening. UNESCO has threatened to put Venice on its endangered heritage list. That would be embarrassing, but might bring more support for preservation. International organizations are offering funding. Experts from around the world are studying how to save Venice. The Mosè barriers are operating now, protecting against floods. They're not perfect, but they work. The question is whether there'll be enough as climate change accelerates. Scientists are already planning Mosè 2.0, even better protection. But that's decades away and will cost billions. Venice has always been about impossible engineering, building a city where no city should exist. Maybe saving that city from the modern world is just the latest impossible challenge. The city that built an empire on determination and ingenuity needs those qualities again. Not to conquer the world, but to survive it. So what can we learn from Venice? Because this isn't just ancient history. This is a story about power, about change, about what happens when you can't adapt. First lesson: geography isn't permanent destiny. Venice became powerful because it sat at a crucial crossroads. Mediterranean trade routes made Venice rich, but when the world found new routes, that advantage vanished. Your strength can become your weakness if you don't see the world changing around you. How many modern companies, cities, even countries are making the same mistake? Relying on one industry, one resource, one advantage, and not preparing for the moment when that advantage disappears. Venice had centuries to diversify, to adapt. They didn't. By the time they realized they needed to change, it was too late. Second lesson: monopolies don't last. Venice controlled the spice trade. They made insane profits, and they got comfortable. They didn't innovate because they didn't have to. Why improve when you're already on top? But someone always finds a way around you. The Portuguese didn't break Venice's monopoly. They made it irrelevant by creating a new system entirely. Third lesson: military power matters. Venice thought they could rely on wealth and diplomacy, and for a while that worked. But when aggressive nation-states emerged with professional armies, Venice couldn't compete. Money can buy mercenaries, but it can't buy the loyalty and capability of a committed national military. Venice learned that too late. Fourth lesson: culture outlasts power. Venice lost its empire, lost its wealth, lost its independence. But Venetian art, architecture, music, literature, that's immortal. The paintings hang in museums worldwide. The buildings still inspire architects. The culture still influences us. Maybe that's the real legacy. Not the battles they won or the trade routes they controlled, but the beauty they created. Fifth lesson: systems can become prisons. Venice's government was brilliant for its time, but it became rigid, conservative, unable to change. The very mechanisms that made Venice stable eventually made it stagnant. You need stability, sure, but you also need the ability to adapt, to reform, to change when the world changes. Venice lost that ability. Sixth lesson: you can't live on past glory. Venice spent its last centuries as an independent state, basically existing on reputation. Remember when we were powerful? That's not a strategy. That's nostalgia. And nostalgia doesn't pay bills or win wars. You have to be relevant now, not just remember when you were relevant. And finally, nothing lasts forever. Venice had over 1,000 years of independence. That's incredible. Longer than most empires, most nations, most anything human-made. But it still ended. Every empire falls. Every golden age fades. That's not pessimistic. That's just reality. The question is what you do with your time at the top. Do you prepare for the future? Do you create something lasting? Or do you just enjoy the ride and hope it never ends? Venice is still there, still beautiful, still attracting millions of visitors who want to walk where merchants and doges once walked. The buildings are crumbling, the population is dwindling, the water is rising. But Venice endures, changed, diminished, but somehow still Venice. Maybe that's the final lesson. Survival matters more than glory. Venice isn't an empire anymore, hasn't been for over 2 centuries. But it's still here, still fighting to exist. Maybe that's the most Venetian thing of all, refusing to give up, even when everything says you should. The story of Venice isn't a tragedy. It's a reminder. of what humans can achieve when they're determined, of what they can build against all odds, and of what they can lose when they stop innovating, stop adapting, stop pushing forward. Every night in Venice, the sun sets over the lagoon. The water reflects the light from buildings that have stood for centuries. Tourists take photos. Locals go about their lives. The city continues, not as an empire, not as a power, just as Venice. And maybe, after everything, that's enough.